The twin suns of Viraxis 9 burned low in the sky, casting long shadows across the cracked and barren wasteland. Dust storms swirled endlessly, choking the air with grit that clung to every surface. It was a world hostile to life, yet humanity had carved out its fragile existence here, clinging stubbornly to survival. Their enclave, a cluster of patched-together domes and rusting metal structures, was tucked into the shadow of jagged cliffs, hidden from the prying eyes of their overlords. Above them loomed the Kelith, an insectoid species whose towering forms and razor-sharp exoskeletons made them as terrifying as they were efficient. To the Kelith, humans were little more than vermin-weak, slow-moving creatures who survived by scavenging scraps while cowering underfoot. They tolerated human presence only because it amused them, like watching ants scurry around after stepping on their nest. But even amusement could grow tiresome, and lately, whispers had begun spreading among the humans. Something was coming. Eris. Cade tightened her grip on the wrench in her hand, focusing intently on the hum of machinery before her. She knelt beside one of the colony's ancient oxygen recyclers, her fingers streaked black with grease. Sweat trickled down her temple despite the cold, sticking strands of hair to her face. At 28, Eris was neither young nor old, but she carried herself with the weary determination of someone far beyond her years. Her job was simple: keep things running. And if she failed, well, no one needed to spell out what happened. When life support broke down on a planet where breathable air didn't exist naturally, as she worked, distant vibrations rattled through the ground beneath her knees. Another patrol, Eris thought grimly. The Kelith weren't known for subtlety. Their six-legged war machines thundered across the landscape, kicking up clouds of dust wherever they went. Most days, they ignored the enclave entirely, treating it as nothing more than background noise. Today felt different, though. There was something heavier about the vibrations, almost deliberate. Eris paused, wiping her hands on her already dirty pants, and glanced toward the horizon. That's when she saw it. A massive shape descended from the heavens, blotting out the light of the twin suns. Its dark hull gleamed faintly against the swirling dust, etched with intricate patterns that seemed alive, shifting slightly as if responding to some unseen rhythm. The ship hovered silently above the settlement, dwarfing everything below it. For a moment, there was complete stillness, a silence so profound it felt unnatural. Then came the voice. "Surrender your most defiant." The words boomed across all frequencies, reverberating inside skulls and rattling teeth. Even Eris flinched, dropping her wrench with a clang. Around her, people froze, exchanging panicked glances. Defiant. What did that mean? Who qualified as most defiant? Before anyone could answer or even begin to argue, a squad of Kelith soldiers materialized at the edge of the colony. Their chitinous armor reflected the dim sunlight, their sharp mandibles clicking ominously as they scanned the crowd. And then, inexplicably, every single guard stopped moving. It wasn't gradual. They simply froze mid-step, weapons raised but unmoving, as if time itself had been paused. The effect lasted only seconds before they snapped back to motion, resuming their march as though nothing had happened. But those few moments sent a shiver rippling through the humans. Whatever this was, it wasn't ordinary. Eris barely had time to process what she'd seen before the guards reached her. Without warning, two sets of clawed hands seized her arms, yanking her upright. She struggled instinctively, shouting protests that went unanswered. "What are you doing? I haven't done anything." But her cries fell on deaf ears, or rather, non-human ones. The Kelith dragged her toward the center of the compound, where others had gathered, wide-eyed and terrified. Her heart pounded wildly as she caught sight of the figure leading the procession. Towering over his own troops, clad in ornate battle armor that shimmered like liquid obsidian, stood Commander Thalrix, his elongated head tilted slightly downward, multifaceted eyes locking onto hers with unnerving intensity. Unlike the other Kelith, he radiated authority, not just physical dominance, but something deeper, almost magnetic. He looked curious, before Eris could think further. The guards shoved her forward, forcing her to stumble onto her knees directly before him. The rest of the humans watched in stunned silence, unsure whether to intervene or flee. Even the guards themselves seemed uneasy, their movements hesitant, as though uncertain of their commander's intentions. For several agonizing seconds, Thalrix simply stared at her. Then, without warning, he extended one clawed hand and placed it firmly on her forehead. The touch sent a jolt through Eris's body, not painful but deeply unsettling, as though something foreign had invaded her mind. She gasped, unable to pull away. All around her, the world seemed to blur, colors bleeding together until reality itself felt unsteady. When Thalrix finally withdrew his hand, the look in his alien eyes had changed. Whatever he had done or discovered, it left everyone frozen, including the guards. And just like that, the story began. The chamber aboard the Keleth warship was unlike anything Eris had ever seen. The walls pulsed faintly with a bioluminescent glow, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow across the room. Strange flora-like growths protruded from the ceiling and floor, their tendrils swaying gently as though alive. The air smelled metallic, sharp and alien, making it hard to breathe. Every instinct in Eris screamed at her to run, but she knew there was nowhere to go. She stood frozen, her heart pounding wildly as Commander Thalrix loomed over her, his multifaceted eyes glinting like shards of glass. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Then Thalrix spoke not in words, but directly into her mind. His voice was cold and resonant, bypassing her ears entirely and echoing inside her skull. "You are not what you seem." Eris staggered backward, clutching her head as if trying to shield herself from an invisible assault. What did you do to me?" she stammered, her voice trembling. She glanced around frantically for some sign of escape, but the guards stationed at the door remained motionless, their weapons lowered yet poised for action. Thalrix tilted his head slightly, studying her with unnerving intensity. "I sought truth," he replied cryptically, "and I found resistance." His claws clicked softly against each other, a sound that sent another shiver down Eris's spine. Resistance. What could he possibly mean by that? Eris didn't consider herself defiant, far from it. She was just a mechanic, someone who kept things running so others could survive. Her life had been defined by caution, not rebellion. But something about her must have intrigued him, because instead of dismissing her or handing her over to his soldiers, Thalrix leaned closer, his towering form filling her vision. "Explain this," he demanded, raising one clawed hand. Suddenly, an image appeared in the air between them, a shimmering hologram of sorts. It showed Eris working on the colony's oxygen recycler earlier that day, sweat dripping down her face as she focused intently on repairing a broken valve. Nothing unusual about that, she thought, just another mundane task. But then the image shifted. Now it showed her pausing mid-repair, looking up toward the horizon where the vibrations had first signaled the arrival of Thalrix's ship. Her expression changed subtly, eyes narrowing, jaw tightening. In that brief moment, she looked determined, almost defiant. Eris barely recognized herself. "That is not defiance," she said quickly, shaking her head. "I was just thinking, trying to figure out what was happening." Thalrix's mandibles twitched, clicking together in a way that might have been amusement or irritation. "Thinking," he repeated slowly, as though tasting the word. "A curious act. Among my kind, such deliberation would be deemed weakness, yet among yours." He trailed off, his gaze drifting past her to the guards, standing rigidly at attention. Even they seemed uneasy, their movements stiff and mechanical compared to the fluid grace of their commander. Eris swallowed hard, trying to steady her nerves. If these aliens truly viewed humanity as weak, then maybe she could use that misconception to her advantage. Summoning every ounce of courage she possessed, she straightened her posture and met Thalrix's gaze head. "If you're looking for defiance, you won't find it here," she said firmly. "We're survivors. That's all we've ever been." Her boldness clearly caught Thalrix off guard. For a split second, his impenetrable facade faltered, revealing a flicker of curiosity or perhaps uncertainty. Humans weren't supposed to challenge their captors. They were supposed to cower, beg, or submit quietly. Eris's refusal to play along disrupted the script. One of the guards stepped forward, hesitantly, clicking its mandibles in warning. "Commander," it rasped in a guttural tone, addressing Thalrix, "this subject exhibits instability. Shall we proceed with termination?" "No," Thalrix snapped, cutting the guard off with a dismissive wave of his hand. The soldier immediately fell silent, retreating back to its post without another word. Whatever authority Thalrix wielded over his troops, it was absolute. Turning his attention back to Eris, Thalrix studied her once more, his alien features unreadable. "Survivors," he mused aloud. "An interesting distinction. Tell me," Human, what drives your kind to persist when logic dictates surrender? Eris blinked, caught off guard by the question. No one had ever asked her that before, not even her fellow humans. Survival wasn't something she'd ever questioned. It was simply what they did. But now, faced with this alien commander who seemed genuinely perplexed by humanity's resilience, she found herself searching for an answer. "It's not about logic," she said finally, her voice softer but no less resolute. "It's about hope. Even when everything seems hopeless, we hold on to the idea that tomorrow might be better. That's what keeps us going." Thalrix's expression didn't change, but there was a subtle shift in the atmosphere as though her words had struck a chord deep within him. For a moment, the chamber fell silent again, save for the faint hum of the bioluminescent flora and the rhythmic clicking of Thalrix's claws. Then, without warning, he reached out and placed his hand on her forehead once more. This time, however, the sensation was different. Instead of invading her mind, it felt almost exploratory, as though he were attempting to understand rather than dominate. Eris clenched her fists, resisting the urge to pull away. Whatever he was doing, she couldn't afford to show fear. Not now. When Thalrix finally withdrew his hand, his demeanor had shifted. Gone was the cold detachment. In its place was something akin to intrigue. "Hope," he murmured, testing the word as though it were foreign to him, a dangerous concept. And yet, he let the sentence hang unfinished, turning away abruptly and striding toward the far end of the chamber. The guards followed silently, leaving Eris standing alone. In the center of the room, despite the lingering tension, she couldn't shake the feeling that something monumental had just occurred. Whether it was good or bad, she couldn't say, but one thing was certain. Her encounter with Commander Thalrix had only just begun. As the massive doors slid shut behind him, sealing her inside the alien warship, Eris realized two things. First, she was no longer afraid, not completely, anyway. And second, whatever Thalrix wanted from her, it wasn't going to be simple. Hours passed, or perhaps it was days. Time seemed to blur aboard the Kelith warship, where the artificial environment gave no indication of night or day. Eris sat cross-legged on the cold metal floor of her cell, her back pressed against the wall as she stared at the faintly glowing patterns that pulsed rhythmically across the ceiling. The chamber wasn't much larger than a closet, but it felt suffocating in its emptiness. There were no windows, no furniture, and certainly no signs of human life beyond the thick, sealed door. Her initial fear had faded into a restless frustration. Thalrix hadn't returned since his cryptic departure, leaving her alone with nothing but her thoughts, and those were proving more dangerous than any alien interrogation. What did he want from her? Why had he singled her out among all the humans in the Enclave? And what had he meant by hope being dangerous? The questions gnawed at her relentlessly, keeping her awake despite the exhaustion weighing down her body. But even as doubt crept in, Eris refused to let despair take hold. She clung to the same stubborn determination that had kept her alive on Virax's Nina, quiet refusal to give up, no matter how dire things seemed. Suddenly, the door hissed open, startling her out of her reverie. To Kelith, guards entered, their clawed feet clicking sharply against the floor. They didn't speak, didn't need to, as they gestured for her to follow them. Eris hesitated briefly before rising to her feet. She knew better than to resist. These creatures weren't interested in negotiation. Still, as she walked between them, she couldn't help but notice something odd about their demeanor. They moved stiffly, almost mechanically, their usual predatory grace replaced by an eerie uniformity. It reminded her of the bizarre moment when Thalrix's presence had caused the guards outside the colony to freeze in place. They led her through winding corridors lined with pulsating bioluminescent flora, each step taking her deeper into the heart of the ship. Eventually, they arrived at a large chamber unlike anything she'd seen before. The walls shimmered with holographic displays showing complex schematics, star maps, and streams of data written in symbols she couldn't decipher. At the center of the room stood Thalrix, surrounded by several other Kelith officers who clicked and chittered amongst themselves in low tones. Thalrix turned as she entered, his multifaceted eyes locking onto hers with unsettling precision. "You have been resourceful," he said, his voice resonating directly in her mind once again. Even in confinement, Eris frowned, unsure whether this was praise or accusation. "I haven't done anything," she replied cautiously. "What do you expect me to do in a locked room?" His mandibles twitched slightly, as though amused by her response. "Exactly my point. Yet your people continue to defy logic. Even now, they resist us." Before she could ask what he meant, one of the holograms shifted, displaying a live feed from the human enclave below. What Eris saw made her breath catch in her throat. The settlement was in chaos. Fires burned unchecked, domes had collapsed, and bodies lay scattered across the ground. But amidst the destruction, small groups of humans were fighting back, using makeshift weapons and clever tactics to fend off Kelith patrols. One group had rigged a damaged oxygen recycler to explode, creating a smokescreen that allowed others to escape. Another had set traps using scavenged parts, disabling several of the six-legged war machines. "How?" Eris whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the chamber. How could such fragile beings stand against the overwhelming might of the Kelith? "Creativity," Thaurix said simply, as though reading her thoughts. "Empathy, unity. These are traits my kind does not understand. We conquer through strength, efficiency, order. Your species thrives on disorder." Eris felt a spark of pride flare within her chest, despite the grim scene unfolding before her eyes. "It's not disorder," she countered. "It's adaptability. Humans don't just survive, we find ways to make things work. That's why we've lasted so long." Thaurix tilted his head, studying her intently. "And yet, you are losing without intervention. Your colony will fall within cycles." She clenched her fists, anger flaring hot and sharp. "Then why bother bringing me here? If you're just going to destroy us anyway, why waste your time?" For the first time, Thaurix's expression softened entirely, but enough for her to see a flicker of uncertainty behind his piercing gaze. "Because I am curious," he admitted. "Your defiance intrigues me. Hope confounds me. Perhaps there is value in understanding what drives your kind." Eris took a step forward, emboldened by his admission. "If you really want to understand us, then stop treating us like animals. Talk to us. Work with us, instead of trying to crush us." The room fell silent, the clicking of mandibles ceasing as every Kelith present turned to stare at her. Even the officers exchanged uneasy glances, their rigid postures betraying discomfort. Clearly, no one had ever dared to speak to this way before. To her surprise, Thaurix didn't lash out. Instead, he regarded her with something akin to respect, a subtle shift in his stance, a slight lowering of his head. "Bold words," he said after a pause, "but actions carry more weight than speech." He gestured toward the hologram, which zoomed in on one particular group of humans attempting to fortify a section of the colony. "Prove your worth," he challenged. "Show me how your hope can change the outcome." Eris swallowed hard, realizing this was both an opportunity and a test. If she failed, the consequences would be catastrophic. But if she succeeded, maybe, just maybe, she could turn the tide. As the guards escorted her back to her cell, Eris's mind raced with possibilities. She didn't have access to tools or resources, but she did have something far more valuable: knowledge. Every repair job, every improvised solution she'd devised in the Enclave had taught her how to think creatively under pressure. Now, it was time to put that ingenuity to use, not just for herself, but for everyone counting on her back home. For the first time since being captured, Eris allowed herself a small, defiant smile. Thaurix wanted proof of humanity's strength. He was about to get exactly that. Eris sat alone in her cell, staring at the faintly glowing patterns on the ceiling. As she pieced together a plan, her mind raced with possibilities, each idea more daring than the last. She knew what Thaurix wanted: proof that humanity's so-called hope could make a difference. But how could she deliver? Without tools, allies, or even freedom, her options were limited but not non-existent. Her thoughts drifted back to the hologram, showing the human enclave under attack. Despite the chaos, there had been moments of brilliance in prioritized traps, clever distractions, and coordinated efforts among her people. It reminded her of something fundamental about humanity. They weren't just survivors, they were problems. Even when faced with overwhelming odds, humans found ways to adapt, innovate, and persevere. But solving problems required resources, and Eris had none. Or did she? A memory surfaced from earlier that day, or was it yesterday? The moment Thaurix had placed his clawed hand on her forehead, probing her mind. At the time, she'd felt violated, exposed. But now, recalling the sensation, she realized something crucial. Thaurix hadn't merely invaded her thoughts, he'd inadvertently opened a connection between them. Whether intentional or not, he'd left a trace of himself behind, like an echo lingering in her consciousness. Could she use that? The idea was risky, bordering on insane. If Thalrix discovered what she was attempting, he might see it as an act of defiance or worse, betrayal. But desperation bred boldness, and Eris had never been one to shy away from a challenge. Closing her eyes, she focused inward, searching for the faint thread of awareness that connected her to the alien commander. To her surprise, it wasn't hard to find. Like a whisper in the back of her mind, it pulsed faintly, almost inviting her curiosity. Carefully, tentatively, she reached out, not physically, but mentally. At first, there was nothing but silence. Then, slowly, fragments began to emerge, flashes of unfamiliar landscapes, strange symbols, and fleeting emotions that felt both foreign and oddly familiar. It was disorienting, like trying to decipher a language she didn't speak. But within the jumble of impressions, one thing stood out: a map, a detailed schematic of the warship, etched into her mind as though it belonged there. Eris's heart quickened. This was it, the breakthrough she'd been hoping for. With this knowledge, she could navigate the ship, locate its systems, and perhaps even find a way to communicate with the humans below. All she needed was a chance to act. The guards returned sooner than expected, their sharp mandibles clicking softly as they motioned for her to follow. This time, instead of leading her to another chamber, they brought her to a vast observation deck overlooking the planet below. Through the transparent viewport, Eris could see Viraxis Nine's desolate surface stretching endlessly beneath them. Fires still burned in the colony, casting flickering orange glows against the dark horizon. Thalrix awaited her, standing silently with his back to the viewport. His towering form radiated authority, but there was a subtle tension in his stance and uncertainty that hadn't been there before. When he turned to face her, his multifaceted eyes gleamed with a mixture of anticipation and skepticism. "Have you considered my offer?" he asked, his voice resonating directly in her mind. "Can your hope alter the inevitable?" Eris met his gaze steadily, her resolve hardened by the discovery she'd made. "Yes," she said simply, "but I'll need your trust." The statement caught him off guard. For a moment, his expression faltered, revealing a flicker of doubt, perhaps intrigue. "Trust is earned," he replied cautiously, "not given freely." "I'm not asking for blind faith," Eris countered. "I'm offering proof. Let me show you what humans are capable of." Thalrix studied her intently, his claws clicking softly as he deliberated. Finally, he nodded once, gesturing toward the viewport. "Very well, prove yourself." What happened next surprised everyone, including Eris herself. Instead of waiting for further instructions, she closed her eyes and focused again on the mental link she'd uncovered. Summoning every ounce of courage, she pushed outward, projecting her thoughts toward Thalrix. Images flooded her mind, scenes from the enclave below, showcasing moments of human ingenuity and resilience. She showed him the rigged oxygen recycler explosion, the improvised traps, and the coordinated efforts of her people working together, despite the odds. Each image carried with it a sense of purpose, a testament to humanity's unyielding spirit. When she opened her eyes, Thalrix was staring at her, his usual composure visibly shaken. "How?" he began, trailing off as if struggling to form words. "How did you—" "It's called empathy," Eris explained softly. "You wanted to understand us. Now you've seen a glimpse of who we really are." For the first time, Thalrix looked unsettled. The revelations seemed to rattle him deeply, challenging everything he believed about humans. He turned back to the viewport, gazing down at the burning colony with an expression that bordered on contemplation. "If this is true," he murmured, almost to himself, "then perhaps my kind has underestimated yours." Eris stepped closer, emboldened by his reaction. "It's not too late to change course," she urged. "Work with us instead of against us. Together, we can create something stronger than either of our species could achieve alone." Thalrix didn't respond immediately. Instead, he remained silent, his clawed hands clasped tightly behind his back. The weight of the moment hung heavy in the air, charged with possibility. For the first time since setting foot aboard the warship, Eris allowed herself to hope not just for survival, but for a future where humanity and the Kelith might coexist. And then, without warning, Thalrix turned to face her fully. "Very well," he said, his voice firm yet tinged with uncertainty. "Show me what your hope can accomplish." With those words, the tide began to shift, not just for Eris, but for everyone counting on her. The observation deck was eerily quiet as Eris stood before Thalrix, her heart pounding in her chest. His decision to give her a chance, a real opportunity, to prove humanity's worth, was both exhilarating and terrifying. She knew this wasn't just about saving herself anymore. It was about proving that humans weren't pests to be exterminated or slaves to be controlled. They were something, more, something capable of standing alongside even the most advanced species. But time was running out. Below them, the colony burned brighter than ever, its fragile structures crumbling under relentless Keleth attacks. Fires raged unchecked, consuming what little shelter remained. The holographic displays around the room showed feeds from multiple angles, each one painting a grim picture of devastation. Yet amidst the chaos, small pockets of resistance still held strong, their defiance flickering like embers refusing to die. Thalrix gestured toward the viewport, his clawed hand slicing through the air with precision. "You claim your kind can change outcomes," he said, his voice resonating coldly in her mind. "Prove it, nor face the consequences." Eris swallowed hard, forcing herself to focus. She couldn't afford fear, not here, not now. Summoning every ounce of courage, she stepped forward until she stood beside him at the edge of the massive window. "I need access," she said firmly, meeting his multifaceted gaze without flinching. "To your ship's systems, to communications. If I'm going to help my people, I need tools and trust." For a moment, Thalrix simply stared at her, his expression unreadable behind layers of alien indifference. Then, slowly, he nodded once. With a sharp click of his mandibles, he signaled to one of his officers, who approached cautiously and handed him a sleek device etched with glowing symbols. Thalrix turned it over in his claws before extending it toward Eris. "This grants temporary access," he explained, his tone clipped but deliberate. "Use it wisely. Fail me, and your species will pay the price." Eris accepted the device, her fingers trembling slightly as she gripped its cool surface. It pulsed faintly in her hand, responding to her touch with a soft hum. Whatever it was, it clearly carried immense power and responsibility. She glanced back at Thalrix, searching for any sign of deception or hesitation. Finding none, she squared her shoulders and took a deep breath. "Follow me," she said, turning toward the door. For the first time since being captured, she led the way instead of following orders. The corridors of the warship felt different, now less oppressive, more navigable. Armed with the knowledge she'd gleaned from the mental link earlier, Eris moved confidently, guiding Thalrix and his guards toward the command center. Along the way, she accessed control panels using the device, rerouting power to key systems, and disabling certain security protocols that might hinder her plans. Each step brought her closer to her goal, though the pressure mounting in her chest threatened to overwhelm her. When they reached the command center, Eris wasted no time. The chamber was dominated by a massive holographic interface displaying real-time data streams from across the ship and planet below. She stepped up to the console, her hands moving quickly as she interfaced with the unfamiliar technology. At first, the system resisted her input, rejecting commands with angry flashes of red light. But Eris persisted, drawing on her experience repairing broken machinery in the Enclave. Slowly but surely, she began to override the safeguards, gaining partial control over the ship's operations. "What are you doing?" Thalrix asked sharply, stepping closer as the displays shifted around them. "Buying us time," Eris replied without looking up. Her fingers flew across the interface, redirecting energy reserves to non-essential functions, while simultaneously cutting off power to the Keleth ground forces attacking the colony. The effect was immediate. Several of the six-legged war machines froze mid-stride, their movements halting as their connection to the ship's central network faltered. Thalrix clicked his mandibles in irritation. "You risk destabilizing my vessel." "I'm stabilizing your perspective," Eris shot back, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. "If you want proof of humanity's strength, then watch what happens next." She tapped a final sequence into the console, activating the ship's long-range communication array. A burst transmission shot outward, carrying a message encrypted in simple binary coda, universal language, designed to be understood by anyone receiving it. Within moments, the colony below stirred to life as scattered groups of humans began coordinating their efforts, guided by the instructions embedded in Eris's signal. From her vantage point in the command center, Eris watched as the tide turned. Humans rallied together, forming organized units that targeted weak points in the Keleth defenses. One group dismantled a disabled war machine, repurposing its parts to create makeshift weapons. Another used debris to build barricades, buying precious seconds for others to escape. Even the fires burning throughout the settlement became tools, used to obscure movement and confuse enemy patrols. Thalrix observed silently, his expression unreadable as the holograms displayed scenes of human ingenuity and unity. For every setback his forces encountered, humanity adapted, finding new ways to resist and survive. It was as if the very act of fighting back fueled their determination, turning despair into defiance. They shouldn't be able to do this, one of the Kelith officers muttered, clicking nervously as he monitored the feeds. They're primitives. No, Thalrix corrected, his voice low but firm. They are survivors. Eris glanced at him, catching the slightest hint of admiration or, perhaps, on his alien features. He didn't fully understand yet, but he was beginning to see. Humanity wasn't defined by its weaknesses. It was defined by its ability to rise above them. But the battle wasn't over. As the humans gained ground, the Kelith regrouped, launching fresh assaults with renewed ferocity. Explosions rocked the colony, sending plumes of smoke billowing into the sky. Casualties mounted on both sides, and the cost of victory grew heavier. With each passing moment, Eris clenched her fists, her resolve hardening. She had shown Thalrix what humans were capable of, but now, she needed to show him why they deserved to live. Summoning every ounce of creativity and courage, she prepared for the final push. The climax of this struggle would demand everything. She hadn't, maybe even more. As the screens flickered with images of fire and fury, Eris whispered to herself, almost too softly for anyone else to hear, "Hope doesn't give up." The command center buzzed with tension as Eris worked tirelessly at the holographic interface, her fingers moving faster than ever before. Sweat dripped down her forehead, but she didn't stop, not even for a second. Every keystroke mattered. Every decision could mean the difference between survival and annihilation. Around her, the Kelith officers clicked nervously, their mandibles twitching in agitation as they watched the tide of battle shift unpredictably below. Thalrix stood apart from his subordinates, his towering form silhouetted against the glowing displays. His multifaceted eyes never left Eris, studying her every move with an intensity that bordered on fascination. She could feel his gaze burning into her back, weighing her actions and perhaps her soul, but she didn't have time to dwell on it. Humanity's fate rested in her hands, and failure was not an option. "What is your plan?" Thalrix finally asked, breaking the tense silence. His voice resonated directly in her mind, cutting through the chaos like a blade. Eris paused briefly, glancing over her shoulder at him. "Hope," she replied simply. Then, turning back to the console, she continued working. "But hope alone isn't enough. It needs action." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Thalrix tilted his head slightly, intrigued despite himself. He had seen flashes of humanity's resilience, their adaptability, their creativity, but this was something else entirely. This was strategy born from desperation, fueled by a refusal to surrender. And yet, he couldn't help but wonder, would it be enough? Eris's plan was audacious, bordering on reckless. Using the ship's systems, she had rerouted power to a specific modular, massive energy conduit capable of amplifying signals across vast distances. Normally used for interstellar communication, it now served a different purpose, broadcasting a message, not just to the colony, but to all humans still scattered across Virax's 9. Encoded within the signal were instructions for a coordinated counterattack, one that leveraged human ingenuity and teamwork to exploit the Kelith's greatest weakness, their reliance on centralized control. "Your forces operate as a single unit," Eris explained without looking up. "Cut off the head, and the body falters." Thalrix's mandibles clicked softly, a sound that might have been amusement or acknowledgement. A bold claim. "Can your kind deliver?" Before Eris could respond, the screens erupted with activity. Dozens of feeds displayed scenes of humans rallying together, their movements synchronized despite the chaos around them. One group had repurposed, scavenged parts to create EMP devices, disabling entire squads of Kelith soldiers with precise bursts of electromagnetic energy. Another team had rigged explosives to collapse key sections of terrain, trapping enemy patrols and buying valuable time for others to regroup. Even children joined the effort, carrying supplies or relaying messages between groups. It was a symphony of defiance. each note played by ordinary people pushed to extraordinary limits. For every setback, there was a solution. For every loss, there was a lesson learned. And through it all, hope burned brighter than ever. But the Kelith weren't defeated yet. As the humans gained ground, their opponents adapted, launching increasingly brutal assaults. Explosions tore through the colony, sending shockwaves rippling outward. Smoke choked the air, obscuring vision and making coordination nearly impossible. Casualties mounted on both sides, and the cost of victory grew heavier with each passing moment. Eris clenched her teeth, fighting back tears as she watched the carnage unfold. She knew what she had to do next, but it came with a price. Summoning every ounce of courage, she turned to Thalrix, her expression grim but resolute. "I need full access," she said firmly, "to everything. Your weapons, systems, your shields, your engines. Without it, we won't survive." The room fell silent. Even the clicking of mandibles ceased as every Kelith present turned to stare at her. Never before had a human dared to make such a demand, especially aboard a warship commanded by Thalrix himself. Yet here she stood, unflinching, meeting his gaze head-on. "You ask for much," Thalrix replied, his tone measured but tinged with curiosity. "And if I refuse, then you'll destroy us," Eris admitted bluntly. "But you'll also lose your chance to understand why we fight, why we endure." For a long moment, Thalrix didn't respond. He simply stared at her, his alien features unreadable behind layers of cold detachment. Then, slowly, he nodded once. With a sharp gesture, he signaled to his officers, who hesitated briefly before stepping aside. Access granted. Eris wasted no time. Returning to the console, she initiated the final phase of her plan. Using the ship's systems, she triggered a controlled overload in its energy matrix, creating a massive feedback loop that disrupted the Kelith's network across the planet. Ground forces froze mid-action, their connections severed. War machines sputtered and died, their sleek exteriors sparking with static electricity. Even the orbital bombardment ceased, leaving the skies eerily quiet. Below, the humans seized the opportunity. Freed from immediate, the warship's command center was silent now, save for the faint hum of its systems, stabilizing after the chaos Eris had unleashed. The holographic displays flickered intermittently, showing fragmented images of the battlefield. Bella was seen transformed from devastation to cautious hope. Fires still smoldered in the distance, but the relentless assault had ceased. Humans moved among the ruins, tending to the wounded, salvaging what they could, and beginning the painstaking process of rebuilding. For the first time in days or perhaps weeks, the colony felt alive again. Eris stood at the edge of the observation deck, her arms crossed tightly over her chest as she gazed down at the planet below. Her body ached with exhaustion, every muscle screaming for rest, but sleep felt impossibly distant. Too much had happened. Too much remained unresolved. She turned slightly when she heard the soft click of claws against metal. Thalrix approaching, his towering form casting a shadow that stretched across the floor. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Thalrix stopped beside her, his multifaceted eyes reflecting the dim light of Virax's 9 twin suns. He didn't look angry or triumphant, just contemplative. It was an expression Eris hadn't seen on him before, one that hinted at something deeper than mere curiosity. Finally, he broke the silence. "You have done more than prove your worth," he said, his voice resonating softly in her mind. "You have challenged everything I believed about strength." Eris glanced at him, surprised by the admission. "Strength isn't always about power or dominance," she replied quietly. "Sometimes it's about holding on when everything tells you to let go." Thalrix tilted his head slightly, considering her words. "Your kind values connection, empathy. My people value order, efficiency. Yet today, your hope has altered the course of events." "It wasn't just me," Eris countered, shaking her head. "It was everyone down there. Every person who fought back, who refused to give up. That's humanity. We're stronger together than we are alone." Thalrix clicked his mandibles softly, the sound almost melodic this time. "A lesson my species would do well to learn." The realization hung heavy in the air between them, unspoken yet undeniable. Humanity had earned not only their survival, but also a measure of respect from the Kelith and, perhaps even understanding. Thalrix gestured toward the viewport, where the colony's survivors worked tirelessly to rebuild their shattered home. "What will you do now?" he asked. Eris followed his gaze, her lips curving into a small, determined smile. "We'll keep going. That's what we do. We'll fix what's broken, heal what's hurt, and find a way to make this world livable, just for us, but maybe someday for others." Thalric studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, but somehow softer than before. Then, without another word, he turned and signaled to his officers. The guards stepped forward, escorting him toward the exit. Before he left, however, he paused and looked back at Eris one last time. "You are remarkable," he said simply. And then he was gone, disappearing into the labyrinthine corridors of the warship. Hours later, the massive vessel lifted off from Viraxis 9, ascending silently into the sky until it vanished among the stars. Below, the humans watched its departure with a mixture of relief and awe. They didn't know exactly what had transpired aboard the ship, but they knew one thing for certain. Eris Cade had changed everything. As night fell over the colony, Eris found herself standing atop one of the newly repaired domes, gazing up at the heavens. The twin suns had set, leaving the sky awash with pinpricks of light. Countless worlds scattered across the galaxy. Somewhere out there, the Kelith continued their journey, carrying with them a new perspective born of humanity's resilience. "Do you think they'll come back?" a voice asked behind her. Turning, Eris saw Mara, one of the younger survivors, clutching a blanket around her shoulders. Her wide eyes reflected both fear and hope, mirroring the emotions of everyone else in the enclave. "I don't know," Eris admitted honestly, "but if they do, we'll be ready." Mara nodded slowly, then smiled, a tentative but genuine expression that warmed Eris's heart. "Thank you," the girl whispered before retreating back inside. Alone once more, Eris turned her attention back to the stars. She thought about Thalrix, about the strange connection they'd shared, and the lessons they'd taught each other. Perhaps the Kelith would never fully understand humanity, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that they had begun to see beyond their preconceptions, just as humanity had learned to adapt and endure. In the distance, someone began to sing a soft, haunting melody carried by the wind. Others joined in, their voices blending together in a harmonious tribute to survival, unity, and hope. Eris closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever was, but it was enough, and sometimes, she realized, enough was all anyone could ask for. Against the vast expanse of the cosmos, humanity might seem small, fragile even. But within that fragility lay a quiet determination that refused to be extinguished. As long as that spark burned, no force in the universe could truly extinguish the human spirit. When Eris finally opened her eyes, the stars seemed brighter than before.